I'll never forget the moment I saw those account statements. Zero, everything we'd worked for over 20 years, gone. But that wasn't even the part that broke me. It was the text message that came after. I deserve this after everything I've done for you. My name's Michael Foster, 52 years old, regional sales director for a medical equipment company. Not the most exciting job, but it paid well enough to build the life I thought we had, the life I thought Elaine and I were sharing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where it all started. I'd been feeling off for months. Dizzy spells, exhaustion that coffee couldn't fix, headaches that seemed to last for days. Just work stress, Elaine would say, barely looking up from her phone. We'd been married for 18 years, no kids, just our careers and the lakeside home in Minneapolis we'd spent a decade renovating. I met Elaine at a conference in Chicago. She was presenting on marketing analytics. I was there representing my company. There was something magnetic about her confidence, the way she commanded the room. We exchanged business cards, had dinner that night, and 6 months later, we were engaged. Back then, she looked at me like I was the answer to a question she'd been asking her whole life. Funny how that changes. The morning it happened, I was in Seattle closing a major deal. I remember standing up to shake hands with the hospital procurement director when the room started spinning. Next thing I knew, I was on the floor with paramedics hovering over me. "Sir, you're having a stroke," one of them said. Not exactly what you want to hear in the middle of a sales pitch. They rushed me to Harbor Medical Center, where everything became a blur of white coats and beeping machines. "Moderate ischemic stroke," the neurologist explained. "You're lucky it wasn't worse." Lucky wasn't exactly how I felt, with half my face numb and my right arm refusing to cooperate. I tried calling Elaine from the hospital bed. No answer. Sent a text explaining what happened. No response. Finally, after hours of silence, I called our neighbor Patricia to check if Elaine was home. "Haven't seen her in a couple days, Michael," Patricia said. "Her car's been gone. Is everything okay?" I told her about the stroke, asked her to keep trying Elaine. Then I called my brother David in Portland. We hadn't spoken much lately. Busy. Lives, different cities. But he answered on the second ring. "I'll be on the next flight," he said without hesitation when I explained the situation. "Just focus on getting better." It wasn't until the next morning that Elaine finally texted back. "No, are you okay? No, I'm on my way. I need some space right now. Don't try to contact me." Space? While I was in a hospital 3 states away after a stroke? I was confused, hurt, but mostly worried. This wasn't like her. Or maybe it was, and I just hadn't been paying attention. The doctors kept me for observation for 3 days. David arrived the second day, stayed with me in the hospital room, making calls, handling the logistics I couldn't manage. When the doctors finally cleared me for travel, David arranged for a medical transport back to Minneapolis. I was weak, disoriented, my speech slightly slurred, but stable enough to go home. Except home wasn't what I expected. When David pulled into our driveway, the garage door was open. Elaine's car was gone, along with what looked like half the items from our storage shelves. Inside was worse. Her closet emptied, bathroom drawers cleared out, the safe in my office left open and bare. On the kitchen counter was a note, handwritten. "On our monogrammed stationery. I've moved on, don't try to find me." Just like that. 18 years reduced to 7 words. "Let's check the accounts," David suggested, his voice careful, measured, just to be safe. I logged into our joint account first. Balance, $202.47. Last transaction, a withdrawal of 36 dated 24/31 time 3 days ago, the day of my stroke. "That's not possible," I whispered, my already weakened body sinking into a chair. But it was. Our savings account showed the same pattern. Our investment portfolio had been liquidated. Everything but my 401k, which she couldn't access without. My signature was gone. Then I saw it, a message in our banking app's secure communication center, sent the day she emptied the accounts. I deserve this after everything I've done for you. I stared at those words, reading them over and over until they blurred. What had she done for me, except share a life I thought we both wanted? I'd never restricted her spending, never questioned her decisions. We both earned good money. What could possibly justify this? That's when David noticed something even more alarming on my laptop screen. A mortgage refinancing application was open in another tab, one I'd never authorized, with signature verification pending. She'd tried to remortgage our house while I was incapacitated. "Michael," David said quietly, "I think you need a lawyer. Now." But instead of calling a lawyer that night, I did something that surprised even me. I sent Elaine a single text, a thumbs-up emoji, nothing else. Then I turned off my phone. David looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "That's it? That's all you're going to say to her?" I nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond words. For now. That night, I slept in our guest room. Couldn't face the master bedroom with its half-empty closet and lingering scent of her perfume. The stroke had left me with a slight droop on the right side of my face and occasional trouble finding words, mild deficits that would improve with therapy, the doctors said. But as I lay there in the dark, it wasn't my health that concerned me. It was the hollow feeling in my chest that had nothing to do with medical conditions. The next morning I finally made 2 calls. The first to Linda Harrison, a divorce attorney. David had researched overnight. The second to my bank, requesting an urgent appointment with the manager. "I can get you in tomorrow at 2 p.m., the receptionist said. "Is there anything specific this is regarding?" "Fraud," I replied, my voice steadier than it had been since the stroke. "Financial fraud." David drove me to the appointment. I brought a folder containing my hospital records, the account statements, and screenshots of Elaine's message. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The bank manager, James Calloway, met us in his office, a glass-walled space that somehow felt both transparent and confining. "Mr. Foster," he began, extending his hand, then quickly withdrawing it when he noticed my still weak right arm. "I understand you have concerns about recent transactions. How can I help?" I slid the folder across his desk. "My wife emptied our accounts while I was hospitalized for a stroke. I need to understand my options." Calloway opened the folder, his professional expression unchanging as he reviewed the documents. But when he came to the hospital admission, records showing the date and time, then compared them to the transaction timestamps, something shifted in his eyes. "Mr. Foster," he said, looking up, "these withdrawals occurred approximately 2 hours after you were admitted to Harbor Medical Center in Seattle." "Yes." "And you were incapacitated at that time, unable to authorize these transactions." "I was unconscious during the first 8 hours following my stroke. The attending physician has provided a statement to that effect." I pointed to the medical document. Calloway's facade of professional detachment cracked slightly. He leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the privacy of his office. "In my 15 years in banking, I've seen many divorce-related financial disputes. But emptying accounts while a spouse is hospitalized for a life-threatening condition." He shook his head, genuine dismay crossing his features. "This crosses ethical and potentially legal lines." That moment, seeing the bank manager's face when he fully comprehended what Elaine had done, gave me the first real sense that I wasn't overreacting. This wasn't just a marital dispute. It was something darker. "What are my options?" I asked. "We can initiate fraud proceedings," he replied. "Given the circumstances, your medical emergency coinciding precisely with the withdrawals, We have grounds to investigate. I can't promise recovery of the funds, especially from joint accounts, but we can certainly try. As Calloway continued explaining the process, my phone buzzed with a text. Elaine, why aren't you answering my calls? We need to talk about this like adults. I showed the message to David, who rolled his eyes. The audacity, he muttered. I turned back to Calloway. How quickly can we start? Immediately, he said, already reaching for his phone. I'm calling our fraud department now. By the time we left the bank 2 hours later, a case had been opened, accounts frozen, and alerts placed on my credit report. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. Back at the house, David helped me through my prescribed physical therapy exercises. My right hand still fumbled with small objects, and occasionally words evaded me mid-sentence, symptoms the doctors assured me would likely improve with time. You should stay with me in Portland until this is resolved, David suggested as he helped me practice gripping a stress ball. This house, it's not good for your recovery. I considered his offer. Portland was beautiful this time of year, and distance from Minneapolis meant distance from the memories that haunted every corner of this house. But something held me back. I can't leave, I said finally. Not yet. If I go, she wins. David didn't push it. Instead, he extended his stay, working remotely from my dining room table while I navigated the dual challenges of stroke recovery and financial crisis. 3 days after our bank meeting, an unexpected visitor arrived. Through the front window, I watched Elaine's younger sister Rachel walk up our driveway, her expression tense. David answered the door, while I remained seated in the living room. Michael needs rest, I heard him say, blocking the entrance. I'm not here to cause trouble, Rachel replied. I just need 5 minutes. I called out, It's okay, David. Let her in. Rachel entered cautiously, as if stepping into foreign territory rather than a house she'd visited countless times for holidays and dinner parties. She looked around, noting the absence of Elaine's touches, the decorative pillows, the family photos, the collection of art glass we'd gathered on our travels. You've been sick, she said, her eyes widening slightly at my altered appearance. Elaine didn't mention that. Stroke, I confirmed. Minor, but still a stroke. Where is she, Rachel? Rachel sat on the edge of the armchair across from me. That's why I'm here. She's staying with me, temporarily. She said you two had agreed to separate, that you'd been planning it for months. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. While I was unconscious in a Seattle hospital, that's when we agreed to this? Rachel's expression shifted from uncomfortable to concerned. What are you talking about? Check the timeline, Rachel. 3 days ago, I collapsed during a meeting. While doctors were determining if I would live or die, your sister emptied our bank accounts and disappeared. I watched the information sink in, watched her face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and finally, a dawning horror. That's not possible, she whispered. She told me. What exactly did she tell you? Rachel looked down at her hands. That you'd been distant for months, that you told her you wanted space, suggested a trial separation, that you'd agreed she could take her fair share of the assets. I reached for my phone, pulled up the banking app, and showed her the message Elaine had sent. I deserve this after everything I've done for you. Does that sound like an amicable agreement? I asked. Rachel's face paled. There's something else you should know, she said after a long pause. She's not alone at my place. I wasn't surprised, not really. There's a special clarity that comes with having your world stripped down to its foundations. You see patterns you missed before, connections that were always there beneath the surface. Who is he? I asked. Bennett Myers, her boss. It's been going on for... She hesitated. How long, Rachel? At least a year, maybe longer. A year. While I was traveling for work, closing deals to build our future. making plans for the early retirement we'd always discussed, a future that apparently she'd been planning with someone else. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Rachel stood up, straightening her shoulders like someone preparing to lift a heavy weight. "Because it's wrong, what she's doing. And because—" She took a deep breath. "Because Bennett has a history. He's done this before. Twice. Married women, messy divorces, money disappearing." I absorbed this information silently, piecing it together with other puzzles from the past year. Elaine's sudden interest in our financial accounts, her insistence on creating separate emails for banking communications, her questions about my business travel schedule becoming more detailed, more specific. "She's making a mistake," Rachel continued, "a horrible mistake, and she's hurting people I care about in the process." She looked at me directly. "Including you." After Rachel left, David and I sat in silence for several minutes. "Well," he finally said, "that explains a few things." I nodded, my mind already racing ahead to next steps. "I need to call Linda," I said, referring to the divorce attorney. The meeting with Linda Harrison the next morning was transformative. Unlike the sympathetic but measured response from the bank manager, Linda's reaction was immediate and strategic. "This changes everything," she said, after I'd related Rachel's revelations: infidelity, financial fraud during a medical emergency, possible conspiracy with a third party who has a pattern of similar behavior. She was already typing notes into her tablet. "Mr. Foster, I don't typically make predictions about case outcomes, but these circumstances are exceptionally favorable for you." "What's our strategy?" I asked. "First, we document everything: bank records, medical reports, witness statements, including your sister-in-law's testimony if she's willing. Second, we file for divorce immediately, citing both abandonment and adultery. Third," she looked up from her tablet, "we request temporary orders freezing all marital assets to prevent further dissipation." David, who had accompanied me to the meeting, asked, "What about the criminal angle? Isn't taking money while someone is incapacitated illegal?" Linda nodded. "It could constitute financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, given Mr. Foster's medical condition at the time. That's a separate matter for the police, but it certainly strengthens our civil case." For the first time since waking up in that Seattle hospital, I felt a sense of direction, of purpose, beyond mere survival. "When do we start?" "We already have," Linda replied, turning her tablet to show me a draft complaint. "I can file this today." The next week passed in a blur of legal filings, medical appointments, and unexpected discoveries. With Linda's guidance, I authorized a forensic accountant to trace the withdrawn funds. What we found was astounding. Not just the emptied joint accounts, but a pattern of smaller transfers over the previous 8 months. Money moved gradually from our shared accounts to a private one in Elaine's name alone. Classic preparation. For departure, the accountant explained during our conference call. Small enough amounts to avoid triggering notifications, but substantial in aggregate. Approximately $127,000 beyond the final withdrawals. Meanwhile, David had been doing reconnaissance of his own. Through mutual connections in the medical equipment industry, he'd learned that Bennett Myers had a reputation beyond just his romantic entanglements. There were whispers of financial improprieties at previous companies, of client accounts manipulated, of sudden departures ahead of audits. "I think this goes beyond just an affair," David told me one evening as we reviewed the latest findings. "I think they've been planning something bigger, maybe using your client connections, your industry knowledge." It made a sickening kind of sense. My position gave me access to purchasing decisions at major hospitals across the Midwest. Elaine had always shown polite interest in my work, asking questions about procurement processes, decision-makers, contract values, information that would be valuable to someone looking to exploit the system. The following day, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Bennett. We should talk man to man. This doesn't have to get ugly." I showed it to Linda, who advised against responding. "They're getting nervous," she said. "The freeze on the accounts, the divorce, filing the fraud investigation, they're feeling the pressure. Good, let them sweat." 2 weeks after my initial meeting with the bank manager, I received a call from James Calloway. "Mr. Foster, we've completed our preliminary fraud investigation. I think you'll want to come in to discuss the findings." David drove me to the bank again, my physical condition improving, but still not ready for driving. This time Calloway met us in a conference room, accompanied by a woman he introduced as Diane Mercer from the fraud department. "Mr. Foster," Mercer began, "our investigation has revealed several concerning patterns beyond the withdrawals made during your hospitalization." She opened a folder containing printouts of transaction records. "We've identified evidence of what appears to be a coordinated effort to systematically transfer funds from your joint accounts over an extended period." She laid out a timeline of transactions, each one small enough to avoid automatic alerts, but forming a damning pattern when viewed collectively. "Most significantly," she continued, "we've found evidence that access to your accounts occurred from unusual locations during times when you were verifiably elsewhere. For instance, account logins from Minneapolis during your documented business trips, password changes while you were in meetings your calendar confirms you attended." Calloway leaned forward. "Mr. Foster, in light of these findings, the bank has made a determination of fraudulent activity. We're preparing to reverse the final large withdrawals made during your hospitalization, restoring approximately $36,824 to your account." I felt a wave of relief, quickly tempered by reality. "And the rest, the smaller transfers over time?" Mercer's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Unfortunately, those present more challenges legally. They occurred over time from joint accounts with what appeared at the time to be proper authorization. However," she added, seeing my disappointment, "we are providing all documentation to your attorney for use in your divorce proceedings, which may help you recover those funds through that process." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something. Concrete evidence of deception, validation that I wasn't imagining things, and most immediately, the return of funds I desperately needed for medical expenses and legal fees. As we were leaving, Calloway walked us to the door. "Mr. Foster," he said quietly, "off the record, in 20 years of banking, I've never seen a clearer case of financial exploitation during a health crisis. If there's anything else we can do to assist you, please don't hesitate to ask." That evening, I received another message from Elaine, the first direct communication since her terse text about needing space. "Michael, this has gone far enough. Call off the lawyers and the bank investigation. We can work this out between us. What happened to us? We used to be a team." I showed the message to David, who made a disgusted sound. "The audacity," he muttered. For a moment, I considered responding, asking the questions that still haunted me. When did you stop loving me? Was any of it real? Did you ever think about what this would do to me? But in the end, I simply forwarded the message to Linda with no additional comment. The next day brought another development. Rachel arrived at the house again, this time with a USB drive. "Elaine doesn't know I'm here," she said, as I invited her in. "David was at the grocery store giving us privacy. I found something you need to see." The drive contained emails, dozens of them, between Elaine and Bennett, dating back nearly 2 years. Many were explicitly romantic, confirming the affair, but others were more disturbing. Discussions of my client list, sales territories, contract values, detailed plans for approaching my contacts after I was out of the picture. They were using my work computer to print some documents, Rachel explained. Left their email open. I only looked because I was already suspicious after our talk. I stared at the screen, a cold understanding settling over me. They weren't just planning to take my money, I said slowly. They were planning to take my clients, my business relationships. Rachel nodded, her expression grim. There's more. They've already incorporated a new company, registered it 6 months ago, listed the address as a property Bennett owns in Michigan. The pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. The systematic draining of accounts, the questions about my work, the timing of the final withdrawal coinciding exactly with my medical emergency, not an opportunistic impulse, but the trigger for a plan long in the making. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Rachel. "She's your sister." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Because this isn't who we were raised to be. Because you don't deserve this, and because," she took a deep breath, "because Bennett has done this before. He finds vulnerable women, uses them, discards them. Elaine doesn't see it yet, but she will, and by then it'll be too late." I copied the files, then returned the drive to Rachel. "Thank you," I said simply. "What will you do now?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. Exactly what they never expected me to do, fight back. Armed with the new evidence, Linda moved aggressively. She filed amended complaints, provided the emails to the fraud investigators, and most dramatically, contacted the compliance departments at several of the hospitals where Bennett and Elaine had apparently been making inroads using my connections. 3 days later, I received a call from Linda. "You might want to sit down for this," she began, an unusual note of satisfaction in her professional voice. "Bennett Myers was just placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. Apparently, someone sent his company a comprehensive file showing attempted client poaching and misuse of proprietary information." I smiled, thinking of Rachel and her USB drive. Imagine that. "There's more," Linda continued. "Elaine's attorney reached out this morning. They want to discuss settlement terms." "What kind of terms?" "Substantially in your favor. Return of all funds taken from joint accounts. No claim on the house or your retirement accounts. Minimal spousal support for a very limited duration." It was more than I dared hope for just weeks earlier, but something about it felt hollow. Too easy, perhaps, or too late. "What do you think?" I asked. Linda was quiet for a moment. "Professionally, I'd say it's a strong offer. Better than many clients receive after months of litigation. Personally?" Another pause. "I think you hold all the cards now, Mr. Foster. The question is what game you want to play." I thought about it overnight, discussed it with David, even called my therapist for an additional perspective. By morning, I had my answer. I called Linda. "I'll accept the financial terms," I said. "With one addition, I want a written admission of what happened, the affair, the financial exploitation. During my medical emergency, all of it, signed by both Elaine and Bennett." That's unusual," Linda replied. "May I ask why?" "Because some things are worth more than money," I said simply. "The truth is one of them." To my surprise, they agreed. 1 week later, I sat in Linda's conference room as a courier, delivered the settlement agreement, complete with the signed statement I'd requested. I read it silently, absorbing the clinical description of their relationship, the calculated financial maneuvers, the exploitation of my medical crisis. "It's done," Linda said, watching me set down the document. "Funds will be restored within 48 hours. The divorce will be finalized in approximately 90 days, given the uncontested status." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. "What happens now?" Linda smiled slightly. Now, Mr. Foster, you get to decide what your new life looks like. That question stayed with me as David drove us home to the house that was now unquestionably mine alone. What did I want my new life to look like? The answer began taking shape over the following months. With my health improving and my financial situation stabilized, I made changes. First, I accepted a position with a competitor that had been recruiting me for years. A role with less travel, more strategic input, better alignment with my post-stroke needs. Then I sold the Minneapolis house, with all its loaded memories, and purchased a smaller place near Lake Harriet, walkable neighborhoods, good for the daily exercise my doctors recommended. David eventually returned to Portland, but with a new commitment to regular visits. My circle expanded too, reconnecting with old friends, strengthening relationships that had faded during my marriage, even cautiously beginning to date again. 6 months after the stroke that nearly killed me, I received a final text from Elaine. I heard you sold the house. I hope you're doing well. I considered various responses, from the coldly dismissive to the pointedly cruel. In the end, I settled on simple truth. I am doing well, better than before in ways that matter. Then I blocked her number and went for my evening walk around the lake. Sometimes the things we think will destroy us end up being the catalysts for necessary change. The stroke nearly took my life. The betrayal nearly broke my spirit. But here I am, standing stronger, seeing clearer, living more authentically than I have in years. I still have the bank manager's business card tucked into my wallet behind my ID. Sometimes I take it out, remembering his face when he realized what had happened. That moment of human recognition, of moral clarity cutting through professional reserve. It reminds me that even in our darkest moments, we're not alone. There are still people in this world who can recognize right from wrong, who can look at a situation and name it for what it is. That matters. Sometimes it's everything. I spent that first night at David's place in a fog. The stroke had left me disoriented, but learning about Elaine's betrayal knocked me sideways in a way that medical emergencies couldn't. I lay on his guest bed, staring at the ceiling fan, watching it spin in lazy circles, unable to make sense of how 18 years of marriage could evaporate like morning dew. David had offered me his anxiety medication, but I declined. I needed clarity, not chemical comfort. I needed to feel every jagged edge of this betrayal, examine it from all angles, understand it completely. Morning brought no answers, just a dull headache and the bitter taste of reality. David had already left for a conference call in his home office, his hushed voice drifting down the hallway as I shuffled to the kitchen. He'd left coffee brewing and a note, "Lawyer appointment at 11, take your meds." My new routine, pills. For blood pressure, pills to prevent another stroke, pills to manage the anxiety that doctors insisted would come. I swallowed them mechanically with lukewarm coffee, my right hand still clumsy, spilling drops on the counter. The bathroom mirror showed a stranger, a man with a slightly drooping right eye, grey stubble on his chin, deep shadows beneath his eyes. 52 suddenly looked 70. I touched my face, tracing the asymmetry that marked where the stroke had redrawn my features. "This is temporary," my neurologist had assured me. "With therapy, most facial paralysis resolves within months." But would the rest of me ever recover? The deeper damage wasn't visible in any mirror. David drove me to the lawyer's office in downtown Minneapolis, a sleek building of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds. Linda Harrison's practice occupied the entire 14th floor. Harrison, Westbrook and Associates, family law specialists. The receptionist guided us to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Mississippi River. "Ms. Harrison will be with you shortly," she said, offering water or coffee. I declined both, my stomach a tight knot of anticipation. Linda Harrison wasn't what I expected. Instead of the stern, severe attorney I'd imagined, she was a petite woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair cut in a practical bob and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. But any impression of softness vanished when she began speaking. Her voice was precise, her questions direct, her analysis ruthlessly clear. "Mr. Foster, I need to understand the timeline precisely," she said, opening a leather portfolio. "When exactly did you notice the first unusual financial activities?" I explained the withdrawals discovered after my stroke, showed her the account, statements on my phone, the enigmatic message from Elaine. Linda took meticulous notes, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or amounts. "And prior to your stroke, did you notice any changes in your wife's behavior? Unusual questions about finances, increased interest in account access, changes in spending patterns?" The question triggered a cascade of memories, small moments that seemed insignificant in isolation, but now formed a damning pattern. Elaine asking to be added as an administrator on our investment platform, her sudden interest in my travel schedule, requesting detailed itineraries. The new password requirements she'd suggested for our accounts for security purposes. "She's been planning this for months," I realized aloud, the weight of premeditation sinking in. "Maybe longer." Linda nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. "In my experience, financial betrayal of this magnitude rarely happens spontaneously. There's usually a calculated progression." She set down her pen and looked directly at me. "Mr. Foster, I need to ask a difficult question. Is there any possibility of another person involved in your wife's decision-making?" The question shouldn't have surprised me, yet it did. In all my confused processing, I hadn't considered the most obvious explanation. "You mean an affair?" "It's a common factor in cases like yours," she said gently, "particularly when funds are being systematically diverted." I tried to imagine Elaine with someone else, creating a secret life parallel to our marriage. There had been late nights at the office, marketing conferences she'd insisted on attending alone, texts she'd shielded from my view. Had I been willfully blind, too trusting, or simply too absorbed in my own career to notice? "I don't know," I admitted finally. "It's possible." David, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Michael, remember those calls from unknown? Numbers that would hang up when you answered? And Elaine always explaining away her weekend marketing retreats. Maybe there's something there." Linda made another note. "We don't need to confirm this today, but it would be helpful to understand all the motivating factors." She closed her portfolio. "For now, let's focus on immediate protections. I recommend filing for a temporary restraining order to prevent further financial maneuvers, formally documenting the unauthorized withdrawals, and beginning discovery to trace the removed funds." "Will I get the money back?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me since seeing those zeroed balances. Linda's expression turned cautious. "Joint accounts complicate matters. Legally, either spouse can withdraw funds without the other's permission. However," she raised a finger, "the timing of these withdrawals during your medical emergency when you were physically incapacitated creates a different legal scenario. There are arguments to be made for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, possibly even fraud. So there's a chance? More than a chance, Mr. Foster. There's a strategy." She outlined the approach: immediate legal action, comprehensive financial forensics, leverage from the medical circumstances, potential criminal implications to pressure a settlement. "But I must be transparent. This will be challenging, expensive, emotionally draining." "I understand," I said, though I wasn't sure I did. How could anyone understand a path they'd never imagined walking? As we were leaving, Linda touched my arm lightly. "One more thing, Mr. Foster. Change all your passwords immediately. Email, social media, any financial accounts you still control. use a service your wife isn't familiar with, and get a new phone, one she's never had access to. Assume everything has been compromised. Back in David's car, the reality of my new existence settled over me like a shroud. I wasn't just a stroke survivor anymore. I was a financial fraud victim, a betrayed husband, a soon-to-be divorcee. Titles I never wanted, identities I never anticipated. "You okay?" David asked as we pulled into traffic. I wasn't, not remotely, but I nodded anyway. "Where to next?" "Phone store," he said decisively. "Then the bank, one step at a time." The Verizon store was crowded, full of people with normal problems, upgrading phones, adding lines for teenagers, complaining about data plans. The sales associate who helped us, a young man named Tyler with an eager smile, asked if I was switching carriers. "No," David explained for me. "My brother needs a new number. He's going through a divorce, needs to secure his accounts." Tyler's eager smile dimmed slightly, replaced with practiced sympathy. "I understand completely, sir. We can set you up with a new number and transfer your essential information. Would you like to keep your contacts or start completely fresh?" A surprisingly profound question. Who did I want to bring with me into this new life? Whose numbers could I trust not to find their way back to Elaine? In the end, I opted for a clean break. New phone, new number, manual re-entry of only the contacts I was certain about. As Tyler processed the paperwork, I noticed his glance at my face, the slight drooping still evident on the right side. "Recent stroke," I explained simply. His eyes widened slightly. "My grandfather had one last year. He's doing great now, almost back to normal." He handed me the new phone. "You'll get there too, sir." The simple kindness from a stranger nearly undid me. I thanked him, my voice rougher than intended, and let David guide me back to the car. The bank was next, Pacific Western, where Elaine and I had kept our accounts for over a decade. The manager, James Calloway, knew us by name, had handled our mortgage refinancing, had congratulated us on investment milestones. How would he react to this unraveling? His assistant showed us into his office immediately when I requested a private meeting. James stood to greet me, then paused, noticing my changed appearance. "Michael, are you all right?" I wasn't ready for the question. For the genuine concern in his voice, my carefully maintained composure threatened to crack. David stepped in smoothly. "My brother's had a medical emergency recently. We need to discuss some account security concerns." James gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Of course. What can I help with?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "I need to know what happened to my money, James, all of it, when it was taken, how it was accessed, where it went." Confusion flickered across his face. "I'm not sure I understand. Your accounts are joint with Elaine, correct? Has there been unauthorized activity?" "Unauthorized by me," I said, pulling out my phone with the transaction history. "While I was unconscious in a Seattle hospital having a stroke, someone emptied our accounts. I need to know everything about these transactions." James took the phone, studied the screen, his professional demeanor momentarily slipping as he processed the implications. He looked up, meeting my eyes, a question in his expression. "Yes," I confirmed, answering his unspoken thought. "It was Elaine. And no, I had no idea it was coming." The bank manager's face underwent a remarkable transformation, from confusion to shock to something closer to controlled outrage. In his 15 years of knowing us, of handling our finances, of seeing us as the ideal professional couple, this betrayal seemed to strike him almost personally. "Let me pull up the complete records," he said, turning to his computer. "We'll need to document everything for your attorney." Over the next hour, James methodically reconstructed the timeline of the account draining, Login times, IP addresses, transfer destinations, withdrawal locations. The picture that emerged was meticulous, calculated, surgical in its precision. The primary withdrawals occurred at 2:17 p.m. Pacific Time, James noted, from an ATM at our Hennepin Avenue branch. The maximum daily cash withdrawal, followed by electronic transfers to an external account. He looked up from his screen. An account in Elaine's name only at First Security Bank opened approximately 6 months ago. 6 months. While I was securing a major contract in Phoenix, planning our anniversary trip, discussing early retirement options, my wife was creating a separate financial identity, preparing her escape route. There's more, James continued reluctantly. There appear to be a pattern of smaller transfers preceding these final withdrawals. Beginning roughly 8 months ago, amounts between $1,000 and $5,000 transferred at irregular intervals. He turned his monitor so I could see the transaction history, a systematic dismantling of our shared finances disguised as ordinary money management. Each line represented a moment of deliberate deception. "How much total?" I asked, my voice strangely calm. James calculated quickly. Approximately $127,000 in the preliminary transfers, plus the final withdrawals of $36,924 from checking and $91,256 from savings. Over $250,000, more than half of our liquid assets, vanished while I lay unconscious with doctors fighting to prevent brain damage. The calculated cruelty of the timing was breathtaking. "Mr. Foster," James said, his tone shifting to something more formal, "given the circumstances, the timing of these withdrawals during your documented medical emergency, this may constitute financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That's potentially a criminal matter." He was the second person today to use that phrase. First Linda, now James. The terminology made it real in a way that my emotional understanding hadn't yet achieved. This wasn't just marital discord. It was potentially criminal. "What are my options?" I asked. "We can initiate a fraud investigation through our security department. I can't promise recovery of the funds, particularly from joint accounts, but we can certainly try. At minimum, we can provide formal documentation for your legal proceedings." I nodded, suddenly exhausted. "Please, whatever you can do." As we were concluding the meeting, a notification chimed on my new phone, an email from an unfamiliar address. I opened it cautiously. "Michael, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But there are things you don't understand. We need to talk before lawyers get involved. Please call me E." I showed it to David, who frowned. "How did she get your new email already?" "Probably has access to all my accounts," I replied, the implications sinking in. How thoroughly had she infiltrated my digital life? What else could she access, manipulate, monitor? James noticed our exchange. "If you're concerned about digital security, I'd recommend consulting an IT professional. Our bank offers identity protection services that include monitoring for unauthorized access." One more item for the growing list of things I'd never imagined. Needing. That evening, back at David's place, we ordered takeout. Neither of us had the appetite to eat. I pushed orange chicken around my plate while David attempted normalcy by recounting office drama at his engineering firm. The mundanity of regular life seemed impossibly distant, like watching a foreign film without subtitles. "The lawyer thinks there might be someone else," I said abruptly, interrupting David's story about project deadlines. He set down his fork. "Does that surprise you? It should, right? 18 years of marriage. Shouldn't I have seen something?" David was quiet for a moment, considering. "When Megan left me, I had no idea she'd been unhappy for years. Sometimes we see what we expect to see, not what's actually there." Megan had been David's college sweetheart, their divorce 5 years ago a shock to everyone who knew them. They'd seemed perfect together, both architects, both runners, both passionate about sustainable design. Yet she'd walked away, citing emotional disconnection neither of us had perceived. "Have you spoken to Elaine directly at all?" David asked. "Just that thumbs-up emoji after seeing her message in the banking app. Nothing else. Is that wise? I mean, don't you want to know why?" Did I? Part of me craved explanation, needed to understand how someone could share my bed, my name, my life for nearly 2 decades, and then systematically dismantle our future while I fought to survive a stroke. But another part, the part still raw, with betrayal, feared that no explanation could ever satisfy, that understanding might only deepen the wound. Not yet, I decided. Let the lawyers handle communication for now. My phone chimed again, another email from Elaine. "Michael, please, you're not returning my calls. You've changed your number. I know you're hurt and angry, but there are serious matters we need to discuss. Don't let this become uglier than it needs to be." The implied threat in that last sentence made something shift inside me. The fog of confusion and hurt crystallized into something harder, more defined. I forwarded the email to Linda without comment, then turned off the phone. "I need to go back to the house," I said suddenly. David looked concerned. "Are you sure that's a good idea? What if she's there?" "Her car wasn't in the driveway when we drove past earlier. And I need to get some things, check if anything else is missing. Tomorrow would be better. When you're stronger." But I was already standing, searching for my jacket. "No, now, I need to see it for myself." David knew better than to argue. 20 minutes later, we pulled into the driveway of the Tudor-style home Elaine and I had purchased 7 years ago. A forever home, we'd called it then, with space for the retirement hobbies we'd planned to develop. The garden Elaine had, meticulously designed, the workshop I'd built in the basement for my woodworking projects, the sun-filled office where we'd placed our desks side by side, though we rarely worked there together. The house looked exactly as I remembered, yet completely foreign, like returning to your childhood home as an adult, familiar shapes inhabited by strangers. I fumbled with my keys, my right hand still uncooperative, before David gently took them and opened the door. The alarm beeped, waiting for the code. I entered it, half expecting it to have been changed in my absence. But the beeping stopped, the system disarming normally. At least some things remained predictable. The foyer light revealed a house in transition, not quite abandoned, but no longer fully inhabited. Elaine's collection of art glass was missing from the built-in shelves flanking the fireplace. The antique mirror that had belonged to her grandmother no longer hung in the entryway. Small absences that signaled larger intent. I moved through the house methodically, noting what was gone. Her clothes from the master closet, her jewelry from the dresser, her extensive collection of business books from the office shelves, the expensive coffee machine she'd insisted on buying last Christmas, even her shampoo from the shower caddy, practical items necessary for daily life elsewhere. In the office, I found more concerning absences. The filing cabinet where we kept important documents stood partially empty, folders missing, taxes, investment statements, property records. My laptop remained on the desk, but when I opened it, the login screen appeared unfamiliar, suggesting a recent wipe and reinstall. "She's been thorough," David observed from the doorway. I nodded, a strange detachment settling over me as I surveyed the surgical precision of Elaine's departure. This was not an impulsive flight. This was a calculated extraction, planned over months, perhaps years, executed with methodical efficiency. I moved to the small safe in the closet, another test. It opened with the combination we'd established years ago, our wedding date followed by the street number of our first apartment. Inside, my passport remained, along with the original deed. To the house, my birth certificate, and various insurance policies. Legal documents she couldn't take without risking obvious theft charges. But the emergency cash we'd always kept, $5,000 in hundreds, was gone. "Let's check the garage," I suggested, a new thought forming. The three-car garage had been a selling point for this house. Space for Elaine's Mercedes, my more modest Subaru, and a bay for my woodworking equipment. As the door opened, I saw immediately what I'd subconsciously expected. My tools were gone. The table saw I'd saved for over a year to purchase. The lathe my father had given me before he died. The specialized hand tools collected gradually over decades. Equipment worth thousands of dollars, but more importantly, irreplaceable in their sentimental value. "She took your tools?" David's outrage matched my own rising anger. "That's crossing a line." It was the first moment I felt something beyond shock and hurt, genuine fury igniting in my chest. The financial betrayal was devastating, but somehow impersonal, abstract. But my tools, extensions of my hands, repositories of memories with my father, physical links to the man I had been before algorithms and sales targets consumed my professional identity. Their absence felt violative in a more intimate way. "She knew exactly what she was taking," I said quietly. "Not just things of value, things of meaning." We returned to the house, my cataloguing now more deliberate. In the kitchen, family photos were missing from the refrigerator door. In the living room, albums had disappeared from the bookshelf. In the guest bathroom, the framed picture of Elaine and me in Santorini on our 10th anniversary trip no longer hung beside the mirror. She wasn't just taking possessions. She was erasing our shared history, removing physical evidence of our life together. As if by controlling the artifacts, she could control the narrative. In the master bedroom, I found a single remaining trace of her. A pearl earring on the nightstand, overlooked in her meticulous packing. I picked it up, its weight insignificant in my palm. We'd bought the set in Hong Kong during a business trip I'd extended into a vacation. She'd worn them to every important occasion since: client dinners, holiday parties, her cousin's wedding. I pocketed the earring without examining my motive for keeping it. As we prepared to leave, I noticed the flashing light on our home phone, indicating voicemails. I pressed play, expecting perhaps service calls or telemarketing messages. Instead, Elaine's voice filled the room. "Michael, it's me. I know you're out of the hospital now. I need to explain some things. Call me back on my cell." Another message, timestamped 2 hours later. "Michael, I'm at Rachel's. I know you're staying with David. We need to talk about the accounts. This isn't what it looks like." And a third, voice tighter, with controlled tension. "Your lawyer contacted me today. Is that really necessary? We can work this out between us. Please call me." David looked at me. "Rachel, her sister, that's where she's staying." I nodded slowly. "Apparently. Do you want to call her back, now that you know where she is?" I considered it, imaging the conversation, her explanations, my questions, the inevitable clash of irreconcilable perspectives. What could she possibly say that would make sense of emptying our accounts while I was fighting for my life? No, I decided, not tonight. Back at David's, unable to sleep, I sat on the guest room bed with my laptop, creating a comprehensive inventory of what I'd observed missing from the house. Financial documents I could largely replace. Personal items were gone forever. My tools represented both financial and emotional loss. I estimated total value, trying to maintain the clinical detachment that seemed to be my only defense against overwhelming grief. Around 2 a.m., curiosity overrode caution. I logged into my email account, not the new one I'd established today, but my original address that Elaine would know, and searched her name. Dozens of unread messages appeared, sent over the past 4 days since my stroke. The progression was revealing. Initial messages feigning concern. I heard you're in the hospital. Are you okay? Then shifting to justification. I know this seems sudden, but I've been unhappy for a long time. Pivoting to negotiation, we can divide things fairly without lawyers. Finally landing on thinly veiled threats. Think carefully about how public you want this to become. I copied all the messages, forwarded them to my new secure email, and sent the collection to Linda with a brief note. FYI, communication from Elaine since hospitalization. Then I did something I hadn't done since waking in that Seattle hospital. I cried. Not dramatic sobs or angry tears, but a quiet, steady release, like a pressure valve finally yielding. For the marriage I'd thought I had, for the future now irrevocably altered, for the trust I'd given so completely to someone who had calculated its value and found it wanting. Morning brought unexpected clarity. I woke feeling lighter, as if the night's release had created space for something beyond shock and pain. Over coffee, I outlined next steps to David. Secure remaining assets, document missing items, engage a digital security expert, follow up with the bank's fraud department, schedule initial stroke rehabilitation. You seem different today, David observed, watching me make methodical notes on his tablet. I am, I realized. Yesterday I was a victim. Today I'm a plaintiff. The shift wasn't about vengeance or even justice. It was about agency, reclaiming control of my narrative, my recovery, my future. Elaine had made her choices, executing a plan months in the making. Now I would make mine with equal deliberation. My phone rang, the new number that only David, Linda, and the medical team had. The screen showed Rachel's name, surprising me. David must have added her contact. Should I answer? I asked him. He hesitated. Your call, but she is Elaine's sister. Could be a setup. I answered cautiously. Hello? Michael, it's Rachel. I need to talk to you. Not about Elaine, well, not directly. About something I found, something you should know. Her voice held an urgency that overrode my hesitation. I'm listening. Not on the phone. Can we meet somewhere? Today? I covered the mouthpiece, whispered to David. She wants to meet, says she found something I should know. He frowned. Trap? Possibly, but Rachel and I had always gotten along well. She'd been notably absent from family gatherings this past year, a distance I'd attributed to her demanding surgical residency, but now wondered if it reflected awareness of her sister's evolving plans. Where and when? I asked her. Ridgedale Library, noon. It's public but has private study rooms. Public location, daytime meeting, potential for privacy, reasonable precautions. I'll be there, I agreed. After ending the call, David voiced his concerns. You sure about this? She's still Elaine's sister. Which means she might have information I need, I countered, and you'll be with me. Damn right I will. The Ridgedale Library was busy with the usual weekday mix. Retirees browsing magazines, young mothers with toddlers at story time, students hunched over laptops. Rachel waited by the information desk, looking more tentative than I'd ever seen. Her, normally confident to the point of intimidating, a trait she shared with Elaine. Today she seemed diminished, uncertain. Thank you for coming, she said, leading us to a small study room she'd reserved. Once the door closed behind us, she placed a USB drive on the table. I found this in Elaine's things. She's been staying in my guest room since everything happened. She left her laptop open yesterday when she went to meet someone. I saw emails I wasn't meant to see. What kind of emails? I asked, not touching the drive. Rachel's professional composure cracked slightly. Emails to Bennett Myers, her division, director at work. She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. They've been involved for over a year. The emails discuss plans, financial plans, using your client contacts after you were out of the picture. Those were their words. The revelation landed like a physical blow, not just an affair, though that confirmation hurt in its own right, but a coordinated professional betrayal as well, using my business relationships, the client network I'd spent decades building, as assets to be appropriated alongside our bank accounts. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "She's your sister." Rachel's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Because this isn't who we were raised to be. Because you don't deserve this. And because," she took a deep breath, "because I've seen Bennett do this before. At his previous company, he finds women in positions of influence, uses them, discards them. Elaine doesn't see it yet. She thinks they're partners. But I've watched this pattern before." David, silent until now, asked the question I couldn't formulate. "How long have you known about them?" "The relationship?" I suspected for months, but confirmed it at Christmas when I saw them together at a company event. "The financial plans?" "Not until yesterday." She pushed the USB drive closer to me. "Everything's on here. Their correspondence, plans for a new consulting venture using your client list, even incorporation papers for a business they registered 6 months ago." Now, 6 months ago, I'd been negotiating the largest contract of my career, securing our financial future, planning surprise anniversary arrangements, while my wife and her lover were creating a competing business designed to capitalize on my professional relationships. I picked up the drive, its small weight disproportionate to its significance. "Thank you for this." "I'm sorry," Rachel said, her voice breaking slightly. "I should have said something sooner. I just never imagined it would go this far." As she stood to leave, she hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should." "No." Bennett's previous relationships, they all followed the same pattern. Married women, messy divorces, money disappearing. He has a system, Michael, and Elaine is just the latest target. After Rachel left, David and I sat in silence, processing the implications of what we'd learned. Not just betrayal on a personal level, but a calculated professional coup potentially years in the making. "We need to get this to Linda immediately," David said finally. I nodded, already reaching for my phone, "and to the bank fraud investigators, and possibly to my company's legal department." A new thought struck me. We should check my client files at home, see what else might be missing. The pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity, not just a marriage ending, but a coordinated attack on every aspect of my life. Financial, professional, personal. A systematic dismantling executed with surgical precision. Yet strangely, this new information brought a kind of peace. The question that had been haunting me, how could someone share 18 years of my life and then abandon me at my most vulnerable, now had an answer. Not a satisfying one, perhaps, but an explanation that made sense of the incomprehensible. As we left the library, stepping into the bright September sunshine, I felt the first stirrings of something beyond grief or anger. Determination. Elaine and Bennett had planned meticulously, executed precisely, anticipated my reactions. But they'd made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed I would be too broken to fight back. Armed with Rachel's USB drive, I felt a strange calm settle over me as David drove us back to his place. The evidence it contained transformed my situation from a personal tragedy to something more concrete. A legal case with documentation, proof of premeditation, a clear narrative of betrayal that extended beyond our marriage into my professional life. I held the small device in my palm, this tiny repository of truth that would dismantle the careful fiction Elaine and Bennett had constructed. "What are you thinking?" David asked, glancing away from the road. "I'm thinking we need a digital forensics expert," I replied. "I want to verify the authenticity of these emails, establish chain of custody, document everything properly." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. You sound like a prosecutor building a case. That's exactly what I'm doing. Back at David's apartment, we plugged the drive into his computer rather than my potentially compromised laptop. The contents were meticulously organized, folders labeled by date, subfolders categorizing different types of communications. Rachel, with her surgeon's precision, had created a digital paper trail that would be difficult to dismiss or explain away. The emails between Elaine and Bennett dated back nearly 2 years, far longer than I had imagined their relationship existed. The early exchanges were innocent enough, work discussions, team projects, casual office complaints. But around 18 months ago, the tone shifted. Personal comments appeared, inside jokes, veiled references to meetings outside the office. And then the unmistakable language of intimacy, plans for weekend getaways disguised as business trips, discussions of a shared future, complaints about their respective spouses, Bennett describing his wife Caroline as increasingly bitter and Elaine referring to me as distracted and emotionally unavailable. I read these characterizations of myself with detached curiosity, like discovering a stranger's opinion of a mutual acquaintance. Was that how she saw me? The man who had supported her career transitions, celebrated her successes, built a life around our shared goals. The disconnect between her portrayal and my lived experience was jarring, but the professional betrayal cut deeper. 6 months ago, the emails began referencing a new venture, Bennett Consulting Group. They discussed targeting my client base, leveraging my relationships, approaching key decision-makers at hospitals and medical groups I'd cultivated for years. Moving on, Foster Medical accounts should be straightforward once Michael is out of the picture, Bennett wrote in one particularly damning email. Most of the relationships are with you anyway, since you handle all the marketing presentations. Elaine's reply was equally calculating. I've been collecting contact information and documenting all his client interactions. Created a database of key players, contract renewal dates, pain points. We'll be able to approach them with insider knowledge they can't refuse. David, reading over my shoulder, swore under his breath. They were planning to poach your entire client base. Not just planning, I said, pointing to more recent emails. They've already started approaching some of them. Look at this. Meetings with Riverside Health System, North Memorial, even Mayo Clinic. Those are all my accounts. The final folder on the drive contained incorporation documents for Bennett Consulting Group, registered 6 months earlier with the state of Minnesota. Elaine was listed as Chief Marketing Officer, Bennett as CEO. The business address was a property I didn't recognize in Edina, presumably Bennett's home. Corporate espionage, David murmured. This goes way beyond a marital dispute or financial fraud. This is theft of proprietary business information. I nodded, a new clarity emerging through the emotional fog. My company needs to know immediately. And so does Linda. I made the calls while David continued examining the drive contents. First to Linda Harrison, who listened without interruption as I explained Rachel's visit and the evidence she'd provided. This changes everything, she said when I finished. Not just the divorce proceedings, but potentially adding corporate legal action. I'll need that drive as soon as possible, original and copies. And Mr. Foster, her voice took on a cautionary tone, prepare yourself for escalation. When people engaged in this level of deception are exposed, the response is rarely graceful acceptance. My next call was to Marcus Reynolds, General Counsel at Foster Medical Equipment. Marcus and I had worked together for 15 years, navigating the complex regulatory landscape of medical device sales. His reaction to my explanation was immediate and unequivocal. I need that evidence today, Michael, and I need you in my office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Bring your attorney. We'll need to coordinate our approaches. As I ended the call, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Things are getting out of hand. Meet me at Caribou Coffee on Lake Street. Just you. 7 p.m. tonight. B. Bennett. Somehow he'd obtained my new number, either from Elaine or through other means. I showed the message to David. Absolutely not, he said immediately. Meeting him alone is asking for trouble. Besides, anything you say could be used against you later. I forwarded the text to Linda, who responded within minutes. Do not engage. Forward any further contact directly to me without responding. We control the timeline now, not them. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. David helped me make secure copies of Rachel's drive. One for Linda, one for Marcus, one for the bank fraud investigators, and the original secured in David's fireproof safe. I called my primary care physician to schedule follow-up stroke appointments and arrange for physical and speech therapy referrals. We even found time to visit a cybersecurity consultant David knew, who began the process of auditing my digital footprint and securing my remaining accounts. Through it all, I maintained a strange emotional detachment, focused, methodical, almost clinically precise in my approach. It wasn't denial exactly, more like a necessary compartmentalization. The personal betrayal remained too vast to process while taking practical steps to protect myself. As evening approached, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Bennett. Your silence is a mistake. This can still be resolved privately. Last chance before things get complicated. And then, minutes later, from Elaine's number, Michael, please. Bennett is trying to help. We can work this out between us. Don't let lawyers destroy everything. Their coordinated pressure campaign only strengthened my resolve. I forwarded both messages to Linda without responding, then turned off my phone for the night. The next morning, David drove me to Foster Medical's corporate headquarters, a modern glass building in the western suburbs where I'd worked for the past 18 years. The security guard at reception, Walt, greeted me with his usual friendliness, then paused, noticing my slightly altered appearance. Mr. Foster? Everything okay, sir? Minor stroke, Walt. I'm on the mend. His face registered concern. Sorry to hear that, sir. Anything I can do? Just need to get up to legal. I have an 8 a.m. with Marcus Reynolds. He nodded, processing our visitor badges. Your wife was here yesterday, he mentioned casually. Said she was picking up some marketing materials for you. I exchanged glances with David. Did she take anything from my office? I believe so, sir. She had your authorization code, so security protocol was followed. Another violation, another boundary crossed. I thanked Walt and headed for the elevators, making a mental note to have my authorization codes changed immediately. Marcus Reynolds met us in the conference room adjacent to his office, along with Diane Horvath, Foster Medical's head of HR, and James Liu, our IT security director. I'd brought copies of the drive contents organized in a portfolio, along with Linda's business card for their reference. Michael, Marcus began, his normally jovial manner subdued. Before we discuss the evidence you've brought, I need to ask, how are you doing? Physically, I mean. HR has been processing your medical leave paperwork, but your health comes first here. The question caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of betrayal and legal maneuvering, my medical condition had become almost secondary, a background concern rather than the life-altering event it actually was. I'm stable, I answered honestly. Some weakness on my right side, minor speech issues when I'm tired, nothing permanent according to the doctors. I'll need regular therapy for a while, but the prognosis is good. Marcus nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. Now about these allegations of corporate espionage and client poaching. For the next 2 hours, we methodically reviewed the evidence from Rachel's drive. James Liu confirmed the email headers appeared authentic, though he would need to conduct a more thorough analysis. Diane Horvath confirmed that Elaine's position as marketing director for the cardiology division gave her access to sensitive client information, including my accounts. Marcus took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific client relationships or contract details. "This is extraordinarily serious," he said finally, closing his portfolio. "Not just for Elaine and Bennett personally, but potentially for their new company and even for their current employer if any of this occurred on company time or using company resources." "What's the next step?" I asked. "Multiple tracks," Marcus replied. "First, immediate protection of our client relationships. James will audit system access to identify what information may have been compromised. Our sales team will contact key accounts to reinforce existing relationships. Meanwhile, our outside counsel will prepare cease and desist letters and evaluate options for legal action against Bennett Consulting Group." Diane leaned forward. "From an HR perspective, we'll need to initiate termination proceedings for both individuals, document the evidence of misconduct, and notify their respective departments." "And my position?" I asked, the practical question that had been hovering beneath the surface. "Given my medical condition and personal connection to this situation." Marcus and Diane exchanged glances. "Your job is secure, Michael," Marcus assured me. "In fact, we'd like to appoint you as special advisor to the transition team that will manage your accounts during your medical leave. Your institutional knowledge is invaluable, especially now." Relief washed over me. At least one foundation of my life remained solid. As the meeting concluded, Marcus asked to speak with me privately. When the others had left, he closed the conference room door and sat beside me rather than across the table. "Michael, I've known you for 15 years, worked alongside you, played golf with you, watched you build this division into what it is today. What Elaine and Bennett attempted here isn't just unprofessional, it's unconscionable." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "The company will handle the business aspects of this situation, but as your friend, I want you to know whatever personal support you need during this time, consider it done. Medical leave, flexible scheduling, home office setup, anything." The unexpected kindness threatened to crack my carefully maintained composure. "Thanks, Marcus. That means more than you know." By the time David and I left Foster Medical, it was nearly noon. My phone, which I'd turned back on for the meeting, immediately signaled multiple missed calls and voicemails, most from Elaine and Bennett, one from Rachel asking if I'd reviewed the drive, and one from Linda requesting an immediate callback. I called Linda first, stepping into the quiet of David's car for privacy. "Mr. Foster," she began without preamble, "I've just received notice that Patricia Wells has been retained as counsel for your wife. This is significant development." "Patricia Wells? Should I know that name?" "She's one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the Twin Cities, known for scorched earth tactics and prolonged litigation strategies. This suggests your wife is preparing for a contentious legal battle rather than a negotiated settlement." I absorbed this information, recalibrating my expectations once again. What does this mean for our approach? It means we accelerate everything. I've already filed an emergency petition regarding the funds withdrawn during your medical incapacitation. The corporate evidence strengthens our position substantially. The judge assigned to your case, Eleanor Michaels, has a strong record on financial exploitation matters. Linda continued outlining strategic adjustments while I gazed absently. Through the car window, watching normal life continue around me, people entering shops, walking dogs, going about their routines. How strange that external reality remained so ordinary, while my personal world had been completely upended. "One more thing," Linda added before ending the call. "Patricia Wells has a particular tactic she frequently employs, attempting to devalue marital assets to minimize settlements. Be prepared for your wife to make claims about business failures, hidden debts, or exaggerated medical expenses. None of it will withstand scrutiny, but it can be emotionally taxing to hear. After hanging up, I checked my voicemails, filtering through the increasingly desperate messages from Elaine and Bennett. The final one, left just an hour ago, caught my attention. "Michael," Elaine's voice sounded strained. "I know you've been to the office. I know you've spoken to Marcus. You need to stop this right now before it goes too far. There are things you don't understand about our financial situation, things that will come out if you push this. Please, for both our sakes, call me back." The thinly veiled threat aligned perfectly with Linda's warning about Patricia Wells' tactics. They were already positioning for the next phase, attempting to intimidate me into a less advantageous settlement. "They sound worried," David observed as I replayed the message for him. "They should be," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, but not about me, about what happens when their whole scheme is exposed. That afternoon, we returned to my house, our house, to collect more of my belongings and further document missing items. The property felt different now, less like a site of personal violation and more like evidence in an ongoing investigation. I photographed empty spaces where my tools had been, documented missing electronics and financial documents, created a detailed inventory of items removed without my knowledge or consent. In the home office, I discovered something unexpected. A hidden file on the desktop computer labeled simply PCH. Opening it revealed hundreds of photographs of a property I didn't recognize, a modernist beach house with expansive ocean views, contemporary furnishings, an infinity pool overlooking dramatic cliffs. "What is this?" David asked, looking over my shoulder. "I have no idea," I admitted. "Never seen this place before." Deeper in the folder, we found the answer. Property records for a house in Pacific City, Oregon, purchased 6 months earlier for $1, $2 million. The owners, Bennett Myers and Elaine Foster, as joint tenants. My wife had purchased a beach house with her lover, a $1, $2 million property I'd known nothing about. The discovery should have been shocking, but instead it felt like merely another piece slotting into place in a puzzle I was gradually assembling. How could she possibly afford this? David wondered aloud. The question triggered a memory, a conversation from last year when Elaine mentioned her parents updating their will, ensuring equal distribution between her and Rachel. Her father, a successful orthopedic surgeon, and her mother, who'd inherited family money, had accumulated substantial wealth over their lifetimes. Her inheritance, I realized. Her father passed away last winter. She never specified the amount, just said it was being handled by the estate attorneys. David shook his head. So she used inheritance money to buy a secret house with her boyfriend while still married to you? That's unbelievable. Actually, it's extremely relevant to the divorce proceedings, I noted, copying the entire folder to a USB drive. Inheritance is typically considered separate property, not marital assets, but combining it with a lover to purchase property during the marriage, that complicates things significantly. We continued our inventory, finding additional evidence of Elaine's separate financial life, statements from accounts I'd never seen, tax documents for the Oregon property, utility bills being forwarded to an unfamiliar address. As evening approached, I found myself in our bedroom, my bedroom now, sitting on the edge of the bed where I'd slept for 7 years. The room felt cavernous, half empty, the absence of Elaine's possessions creating negative space that somehow contained more presence than physical objects would have. On impulse, I opened the nightstand drawer on what had been my side of the bed. Inside, beneath a dog-eared novel and reading glasses, lay a small, velvet box I didn't recognize. Opening it revealed a pair of diamond earrings I'd never seen before, certainly. Never purchased for Elaine, a gift from Bennett presumably, left behind either in haste or deliberate abandonment. I closed the box and returned it to the drawer, Another piece of evidence in the ongoing documentation of betrayal. "Ready to go?" David asked from the doorway. I nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The adrenaline that had carried me through the day's discoveries and strategic planning was ebbing, leaving behind bone-deep fatigue. The physical reality of stroke recovery, temporarily overshadowed by immediate crises, reasserted itself with vengeance. Back at David's apartment, I managed a light dinner before retiring to the guest room, my new temporary refuge. Sleep came, swiftly but brought unsettling dreams. Corridors of empty rooms, doors that wouldn't open, searching for something unnamed and vital. I woke disoriented at 3 a.m., momentarily forgetting where I was, reaching instinctively for Elaine before reality. Crashed back. The darkness felt oppressive, the silence absolute. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I allowed myself to fully feel the loss, not just of our marriage or finances or professional stability, but of the future I'd believed we were building together. Retirement plans exploring. National parks in our renovated Airstream. Holidays with eventual nieces and nephews when Rachel started her family. Growing old in the lake house we'd been saving for, watching sunsets from Adirondack chairs on the dock. An entire projected timeline of shared experiences evaporated like morning mist. I didn't cry, had moved beyond tears to a deeper, more fundamental grief. Instead, I sat in the darkness, acknowledging the death of that imagined future, giving it the respect of conscious recognition rather than suppressed pain. By dawn, something had shifted. Not healing exactly, the wound was too fresh, too profound for that, but a kind of acceptance. This was my reality now. Not the life I'd chosen or expected, but the one I needed to navigate with whatever dignity and purpose I could muster. When David knocked gently on the door at 7 a.m., I was already dressed, reviewing notes for the day's appointments on my tablet. "You okay?" he asked, studying my face. "You look different." "I am different," I realized. Aloud. Yesterday I was still hoping to understand why. Today I'm focused on what happens next. The shift wasn't dramatic or complete. I knew there would still be moments of anger, confusion, grief, but the paralyzing need to comprehend Elaine's choices had been replaced by determination to protect what remained of my life and build something new from the ruins. Our first appointment that day was with Harrison Westbrook, the forensic accountant Linda had engaged to trace the withdrawn funds and document financial improprieties. Harrison's office occupied the 10th floor of a downtown building, modern, minimalist, with the precision you'd expect from someone who specialized in following money trails. "Mr. Foster," he greeted me, rising from behind a glass desk covered with multiple monitors displaying financial data. "I've begun preliminary analysis based on the records your attorney provided." For the next hour, Harrison walked us through his findings, visualizations of account transfers, timelines of withdrawals, patterns of financial movement that revealed the systematic nature of Elaine's preparations. The picture that emerged was methodical, calculated, executed over many months. "Based on these transaction patterns," Harrison explained, pointing to a particularly telling graph, "I can document approximately $294,000 diverted from joint accounts to separate holdings over the past 14 months. Additionally, the Oregon property transaction shows commingling of inheritance funds with what appear to be diverted marital assets for the down payment." "Can we recover any of this?" I asked. Harrison's expression turned cautious. "Recovery is complex in these situations. The funds withdrawn during your hospitalization present the strongest case due to the exploitation element. The gradual transfers are more challenging legally, but not impossible given the evidence of premeditation and the connection to the corporate espionage aspects." His clinical analysis was oddly comforting, reducing the emotional devastation. to data points, patterns, evidence that could be documented and addressed through proper channels. My recommendation, Harrison continued, is to petition for immediate freezing of all accounts connected to both your wife and Mr. Myers, including their consulting company and the Oregon property. This preserves assets while the larger legal questions proceed. I nodded, making notes on my tablet. And timeline for this? Your attorney has already filed the emergency petition. Given the medical exploitation element, we should see judicial action within days rather than weeks. As we were concluding the meeting, my phone vibrated with an incoming call, Rachel's number. I excused myself to answer, stepping into the hallway. "Michael, are you somewhere private?" Her voice sounded tense, urgent. "Private enough. What's happening?" "Elaine knows I gave you the drive." The words came in a rush. "She confronted me this morning. She's furious, saying I've betrayed her, that I don't understand what I've done." "Are you safe?" I asked, immediately concerned. "Yes, I'm at the hospital now, working a double shift. But Michael, there's more. She said they're accelerating the timeline, that Bennett is handling the situation. I don't know exactly what that means, but it sounded concerning." A cold certainty settled over me. They're planning to leave, probably heading to the Oregon property. Oregon? What property? I briefly explained the Pacific City house discovery. "Rachel, I need you to do something. It's important. If Elaine contacts you again, don't mention this call. Act upset but not hostile. We need to know their plans without alerting them that we're onto the Oregon connection." "I can do that," she agreed, her voice steadying. "I should go. Rounds. Starting. Be careful, Michael." I returned to the conference room and relayed Rachel's warning to David and Harrison. The accountant immediately reached for his phone. "I'll notify Ms. Harrison," he said. "We need to expedite the asset freeze petition. If they're planning to flee the jurisdiction, that changes our legal strategy significantly." David drove me directly to Linda's office from the meeting, both of us silent, processing the implications of this latest development. The pieces were moving faster now, the carefully constructed facade of Elaine and Bennett's plan crumbling under exposure and scrutiny. At Linda's office, we found her already in strategic mode. Conference table covered with documents, assistant bringing in coffee and sandwiches for what promised to be a long session. "Rachel's information confirms what we suspected," Linda said, after I'd explained the call. "They're panicking, accelerating their timeline, likely planning to relocate to the Oregon property and attempt to manage damage control from a distance." "Can we stop them?" I asked. Linda's expression was grim, but determined. "We already have. Judge Michael signed the emergency asset freeze this morning, all accounts connected to either of them, the consulting company, and specifically including the Pacific City property. They cannot sell it, borrow against it, or transfer ownership." She slid a document across the table, a court order with Judge Eleanor Michael's signature prominently displayed at the bottom. "Additionally, given the evidence of potential flight risk, the judge has ordered them to surrender their passports pending resolution of the financial fraud investigation." For the first time in days, I felt something close to hope, not for reconciliation or even full financial recovery, but for accountability, for consequences proportionate to actions, for the reassurance that systems designed to protect the vulnerable still functioned when properly engaged. "What happens now?" I asked. Linda leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "Now we wait for their response. They have three options: comply with the court orders and engage in legitimate legal proceedings, attempt to flee anyway, triggering criminal contempt charges, or propose settlement terms to avoid protracted litigation. And if they choose option 3, then we evaluate their offer against what we believe we can achieve through continued legal action." She met my eyes directly. "But Mr. Foster, Given what we now know about their planning, their deception, and particularly the timing of their financial maneuvers during your medical emergency, we negotiate from a position of considerable strength. As we were preparing to leave, Linda's assistant entered with an urgent message. Patricia Wells had called, requesting an immediate conference call between the attorneys. "They've received the court orders," Linda noted, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "That was faster than expected. Shall we see what Ms. Wells has to say?" She set up the call on speaker in her office, David and I remaining silent as agreed beforehand. "Linda," Patricia Wells's voice filled the room, crisp and authoritative. "This emergency petition is excessive and unwarranted. My client was acting within her legal rights regarding joint accounts. These allegations of exploitation are inflammatory and defamatory." "Patricia," Linda replied calmly, "we both know the timing of the withdrawals during Mr. Foster's documented medical incapacitation creates serious legal issues. Add to that the evidence of corporate espionage, the undisclosed Oregon property purchased with commingled funds, and the apparent preparations to flee the jurisdiction." "Oh, my clients categorically deny any intention to flee," Wells interrupted sharply. "The Oregon property is a vacation home, nothing more, and any business activities were legitimate entrepreneurial endeavors unrelated to Mr. Foster's employment. The emails explicitly discussing Mr. Foster's client relationships suggest otherwise," Linda countered, her tone remaining measured. "But perhaps we can discuss potential resolution rather than litigating through this call." A brief silence followed before Wells responded, her tone shifting slightly. "My clients would consider reasonable settlement discussions, provided the asset freeze is modified to allow basic living expenses. We can discuss limited carve-outs for documented necessary expenses," Linda agreed, "contingent upon full financial disclosure and surrender of passports as ordered by Judge Michaels." More negotiation followed, technical details about account access, disclosure requirements, scheduled conferences. Throughout, I remained silent, listening to the legal machinery engage around the ruins of my marriage and financial life. When the call ended, Linda turned to me. "They're looking for an exit strategy. The corporate espionage angle has them particularly concerned. Potential criminal charges change the calculation significantly." "So what now?" David asked. "Now," Linda replied, "we prepare our settlement terms. Comprehensive, fair but firm, designed to protect Mr. Foster's interests, while offering your wife and Mr. Myers a path to resolution that doesn't involve criminal prosecution." As David and I left Linda's office, emerging into the late afternoon sunlight, I felt oddly lighter, not from any emotional resolution, but from the gradual restoration of order to chaos. Systems were engaging, processes were working, accountability was possible. "You know what's strange?" I said as we walked to the parking garage. "A week ago, I thought I'd lost everything. Today I realize what I've actually lost is something that was already gone without my knowledge. What I'm fighting for now is my future, not my past." David squeezed my shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the journey still ahead, but also recognition of how far I'd already come from that hospital bed in Seattle, from that first devastating discovery of empty accounts and cold betrayal. The road to recovery, both physical and financial, would be long. But for the first time since the stroke, since the text message that had upended my world, I felt genuine conviction that there would be a future worth rebuilding toward. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with a strange sense of inevitability. 2 weeks had passed since the asset freeze order, a fortnight of careful preparation, strategic planning, and continued recovery. My physical therapy was progressing, the weakness in my right side gradually improving, my speech clearer, especially when I wasn't tired or stressed. David had been my constant support, driving me to appointments, helping with paperwork, providing the quiet stability I needed to navigate this new reality. Today would be my first face-to-face encounter with Elaine since the stroke. Since discovering her betrayal, Linda had prepared me extensively, coaching me on maintaining composure, focusing on facts rather than emotions, presenting myself as the reasonable party, regardless of provocations. In the end, however, it was David's simpler advice that resonated most. Just remember who you are, not who she tried to make you believe you were. The Hennepin County Family Court building loomed ahead as David pulled into the parking structure, an imposing concrete and glass structure where countless marriages had been legally dismantled. We arrived 45 minutes early at Linda's recommendation, allowing time for security procedures and last-minute preparation. "Ready?" David asked as we sat in the parked car, the engine still running. I straightened my tie, the only one I owned, purchased years ago for client presentations and formal occasions. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed a man changed but steadying, the facial asymmetry from the stroke less pronounced, my eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, surprised by the calmness in my voice. Linda met us in the courthouse lobby, immaculate in a charcoal suit, carrying a slim leather portfolio. "Mr. Foster, you look well," she observed, studying my appearance with a professional eye. "Remember, Judge Michaels will be focused on financial matters today, not emotional ones. Answer only what's asked, directly and concisely." We proceeded through security and up to the 6th floor, where courtroom 12 awaited. The hallway outside was sparsely populated at this early hour, a court clerk arranging files, a young couple speaking in hushed tones with their attorney, a solitary bailiff checking his phone. Linda guided us to a small conference room to review final details. "The forensic accountant's report arrived this morning," she said, removing documents from her portfolio. "Extremely favorable to our position. Confirms systematic diversion of funds beginning approximately 14 months ago, accelerating significantly in the 3 months prior to your stroke." She handed me a summary page with key findings highlighted: $294,732 transferred from joint accounts to Elaine's separate holdings, $165,000 from her inheritance combined with $85,000 of marital assets for the Oregon property purchase, $63,278 in unauthorized credit card charges for expenses related to Bennett Consulting Group. "This corroborates everything we've been arguing," Linda noted, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Judge Michaels has reviewed this report along with your medical records documenting incapacitation during the final major withdrawals. I studied the numbers, these clinical tabulations of betrayal, and the corporate espionage aspects. Foster Medical's legal team has provided a separate brief outlining potential damages and intellectual property concerns. While that's technically a different legal matter, it establishes pattern and intent relevant to the financial exploitation claims." At 8:45, Linda received a text message. "Patricia Wells has arrived with her clients. They're in the main corridor now." My heart rate accelerated despite my best efforts at composure. David noticed immediately, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Remember, they're the ones who should be nervous today, not you." We waited 5 more minutes before Linda nodded decisively. "Time to proceed to the courtroom. Mr. Foster, remember, focused, calm, factual." The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more intimate than the grand chambers portrayed in television dramas. Dark wood paneling, the Minnesota state seal mounted behind the judge's bench, simple gallery seating separated from the proceedings by a wooden railing. And there, seated at the table on the right side of the room, were Elaine and Bennett, heads bent together in whispered conversation. Patricia Wells sat beside them, arranging documents with practiced efficiency. I faltered momentarily at the threshold, the reality of seeing them together hitting harder than anticipated. Elaine looked exactly as she always had, elegant in a navy suit, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. Bennett was a man I'd met only twice at company functions. Tall, distinguished in a carefully cultivated way, silver at his temples contrasting with dark hair. They looked up simultaneously as we entered, their expressions shifting in telling ways. Bennett's face hardened, a muscle tightening in his jaw. But it was Elaine's reaction that caught me unprepared, a flash of something almost like fear before. Her features composed into neutral detachment. Linda guided me to the left table, positioning herself between me and their side of the room. David took a seat in the gallery directly behind us, his presence a silent support. "Don't look at them," Linda murmured. "Focus on our materials." I complied, deliberately arranging my notes, adjusting my water glass, controlling my breathing as the courtroom gradually filled with administrative staff, legal assistants, and the court reporter setting up her equipment. At precisely 9 skies, the bailiff called the court to order. "All rise. The Hennepin County Family Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Michaels presiding." Judge Michaels entered from a side door, a woman in her early 60s, with short grey hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and an air of no-nonsense efficiency. She took her seat, arranged her materials, then addressed the room. "Be seated. We're here for preliminary matters in Foster versus Foster, case number FC 2023-4872. This hearing will address the emergency asset freeze currently in effect and establish parameters for financial disclosure moving forward." She looked up, surveying the parties. "Counsel, please identify yourselves for the record." Linda and Patricia made their formal introductions. As they spoke, I noticed Judge Michaels studying me with careful attention, likely noting the lingering evidence of stroke in my features. "Before we proceed," the judge continued, "I want to clarify the scope of today's proceedings. This is not a final determination of asset division or financial culpability. We are addressing interim measures during the pendency of this divorce. Action, with particular focus on the allegations of financial exploitation during Mr. Foster's medical emergency." She turned to Patricia Wells. "Counsel, I've reviewed your motion to dissolve the emergency asset freeze. Please present your argument." Patricia Wells rose, the very picture of professional confidence. "Your Honor, while we sympathize with Mr. Foster's medical situation, the asset freeze, as currently implemented, creates undue hardship for my client. Mrs. Foster has been unable to access funds for basic living expenses, professional obligations, and ongoing business commitments." She continued for several minutes, characterizing the freeze as overreaching and punitive, suggesting that joint accounts by definition gave both parties equal access regardless of timing, and positioning Elaine as a financially independent professional being unfairly restricted. Throughout, I maintained the composed expression Linda had coached, even as Wells depicted Elaine as the reasonable party and me as vindictively pursuing financial strangulation as retribution for marital discord. When Wells concluded, "Judge," Michaels turned to Linda. "Counsel for the petitioner, your response?" Linda rose, her manner measured and precise. "Your Honor, this case presents extraordinary circumstances that fully justify the emergency measures implemented. Mr. Foster suffered a stroke while on business travel, rendering him temporarily incapacitated. Medical records confirm he was unconscious at Harbor Medical Center in Seattle when the final major withdrawals occurred, transactions that effectively emptied joint accounts containing his retirement savings, emergency funds, and operating capital for his business activities." She methodically outlined the forensic accountant's findings, highlighting the systematic nature of the withdrawals. the timing correlation with my medical crisis, and the connection to undisclosed assets like the Oregon property. Furthermore, Linda continued, evidence suggests these financial maneuvers were part of a larger scheme involving corporate espionage and client poaching from Mr. Foster's employer, activities that have triggered separate legal proceedings but establish relevant pattern and intent. Judge Michaels studied the forensic report as Linda spoke, occasionally making notes. When Linda concluded, the judge addressed both attorneys. I've reviewed the submissions thoroughly, including Mr. Foster's medical records, the forensic accounting analysis, and the supplementary information regarding potential corporate improprieties. She turned to Patricia Wells. Counsel, the timing of these transactions is troubling. Your client withdrew substantial funds literally while her husband was unconscious following a stroke. How do you reconcile this with basic fiduciary obligations between spouses? Wells seemed momentarily flustered by the direct question. Your Honor, Mrs. Foster was unaware of the precise timing of her husband's medical situation. She had legitimate concerns about financial stability given ongoing marital difficulties, and took reasonable steps to secure her economic future. Judge Michaels raised a skeptical eyebrow. Hospital records indicate Mrs. Foster was notified of her husband's condition by medical staff. Phone records show this notification preceded the withdrawals by approximately 2 hours. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I risked a glance at Elaine, whose composed facade had slipped, revealing momentary panic as she whispered urgently to Wells. The judge continued, her tone increasingly stern. Additionally, the systematic nature of the earlier transfers, always just below reporting thresholds, always during Mr. Foster's documented business travel, suggests deliberate concealment rather than routine financial management. Wells attempted to recover. Your Honor, these characterizations are speculative. The accounts in question were joint assets with equal access rights for both parties. Equal access under normal circumstances, counsel, not equal right to exploit a medical emergency for financial advantage. Judge Michaels shuffled her papers decisively. The asset freeze will remain in effect with the following modifications. Mrs. Foster may access $3,000 monthly for documented living expenses. All other restrictions continue pending full financial disclosure and further proceedings. She turned to Linda. Counsel, prepare the appropriate order reflecting these terms. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a comprehensive financial review once disclosure is complete. With that, she gathered her materials. Court is adjourned. The bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Michaels exited. As the courtroom began to clear, I exhaled slowly, the tension of the past hour releasing gradually from my shoulders. That went exceptionally well, Linda murmured, gathering her documents. Judge Michaels clearly recognizes the exploitation element. Maintaining the freeze with only minimal modification put significant pressure on their position. As we prepared to leave, I noticed Elaine approaching, Patricia Wells attempting to intercept her without success. Linda immediately stepped between us, a protective barrier against whatever confrontation Elaine intended. I need 5 minutes, Elaine said, her voice carrying the controlled intensity I'd heard countless times during our marriage when she was containing anger beneath a professional veneer. Privately, no lawyers. Linda turned to me, a warning in her eyes. Mr. Foster, I strongly advise against any unmediated communication at this stage. I considered the options, weighing Linda's professional caution against my own curiosity about what Elaine could possibly say after weeks of silence followed by today's courtroom revelations. Perhaps it was the stroke survivor's altered perspective, or simply exhaustion with the elaborate dance of legal proxies, but I found myself nodding. 5 minutes. In the conference room with the door open. David stays. Linda looked displeased but acquiesced. I'll be directly outside. Say nothing about settlement terms or financial details. The small conference room where we'd prepared earlier now became the setting for this unexpected confrontation. David positioned himself by the doorway, arms crossed, a silent sentinel. Elaine sat across from me, perfectly composed, except for the slight tremor in her hands as she placed them on the table between us. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. 18 years of shared history, intimacy, and accumulated knowledge suspended in the loaded silence. She was both utterly familiar and completely foreign to me now, like meeting the identical twin of someone you once loved. You look better than I expected, she finally said, studying my face. The stroke, they said it was serious. It was, I replied simply. What do you want, Elaine? She straightened, regaining the poised corporate demeanor I'd seen her deploy in countless professional situations. This has gone too far, Michael. The asset freeze, the corporate espionage allegations involving my sister. It's excessive and unnecessary. Unnecessary, I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. Was it necessary to empty our accounts while I was unconscious? Was it necessary to purchase a secret beach house with your lover using our joint funds? Was it necessary to plan the systematic dismantling of my client relationships while I was building our future? Her expression hardened. You have no idea what my reality has been these past few years. The emotional absence, the constant travel, the career sacrifices I made while you built your precious client network. So this was, what? Justified retribution? Fair compensation for perceived grievances? I leaned forward slightly. You could have asked for divorce, Elaine. You could have negotiated a settlement, divided assets equitably, moved on with dignity. Instead, you chose exploitation and deception on an extraordinary scale. Bennett and I have a real connection, she said, her voice dropping. Something I haven't felt with you in years. We have plans, vision, a future we're building together. This vindictive legal campaign is just delaying the inevitable. Dune, the complete lack of remorse, the absence of even basic acknowledgement of the harm caused, was somehow more illuminating than any explanation could have been. The woman across from me was not struggling with guilt or conflicted about her choices. She was simply frustrated that her carefully constructed exit strategy had encountered unexpected obstacles. What exactly did you come here to say, Elaine? I asked, suddenly weary of the conversation. I'm offering a reasonable compromise, she replied, shifting to negotiation mode. I return 30% of the withdrawn funds. You drop the corporate espionage claims and sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding our personal matters. We process the divorce quickly and quietly, and everyone moves forward. I studied her, this stranger wearing my wife's face, and felt an unexpected wave of something close to pity, not for her current predicament that was entirely self-created, but for the hollow future she was rushing toward. Bennett Myers with his pattern of similar relationships, the Oregon dream house built on deception, the consulting business premised on stolen client relationships rather than genuine value creation. No, I said simply, her perfectly maintained composure cracked slightly. No? That's your entire response? The time for private negotiations ended when you made your choices, Elaine. Everything proceeds through legal channels now. You're being deliberately punitive, she hissed, abandoning the reasonable facade. This could destroy Bennett's career, my professional reputation. Your actions have consequences, I interrupted calmly. I didn't create this situation. I'm merely insisting on appropriate accountability. She stood abruptly, gathering her purse with jerky movements. This isn't over, Michael, not by a long shot. Actually, I replied. It was over the moment you decided our marriage, my health, and our shared finances were acceptable casualties of your exit strategy. You just didn't tell me. As she turned to leave, I added, "One question, Elaine. Was any of it real? 18 years. Was any of it genuine?" She paused at the doorway, her back to me. For a moment I thought she might offer some final insight, some meaningful acknowledgement of our shared history. Instead, she simply walked out without another word, the click of her heels receding down the corridor. David moved from his position by the door, taking the seat Elaine had vacated. "You okay?" Surprisingly, yes, I realized. That wasn't the conversation I expected, but it was the one I needed. Linda entered moments later, concern evident in her expression. "What happened?" She offered a lowball settlement, 30% restitution, in exchange for dropping everything else. Linda's eyebrows rose. Remarkably tone-deaf given today's hearing, Judge Michaels clearly views this as financial exploitation, not routine divorce asset disputes. "It wasn't a serious offer," David observed. "It was a reconnaissance mission." She wanted to gauge Michael's resolve, see if the stroke had left him vulnerable to manipulation. He was right, I realized. The Elaine who approached me today wasn't seeking reconciliation or even reasonable compromise. She was searching for weakness, for an opening, for the familiar pressure points she'd mapped during our marriage. But I was no longer the same man she'd left unconscious in that Seattle hospital. The stroke had changed me, certainly, but so had her betrayal and my subsequent journey through the wreckage she'd created. The Michael Foster sitting in this conference room was not the vulnerable target she'd anticipated. "Let's go," I said, suddenly eager to leave the courthouse behind. "We've accomplished what we came for today." Outside, the October air carried the first real bite of approaching winter, sharp and clarifying. Linda confirmed our next steps, proceeding with comprehensive financial disclosure requirements, coordinating with Foster Medical's separate legal actions, preparing for the full hearing in 30 days. As we walked to the parking garage, my phone chimed with a text from Rachel. "How did it go? Are you okay?" I replied simply, "Better than expected." Judge maintained the freeze, spoke briefly with E afterward. "I'm fine. Thank you for everything." Her response came quickly. "Bennett's furious, called someone about liquidating Oregon assets regardless of court orders. Be careful." I showed the message to Linda, who immediately made a call to her office. "We need to notify Judge Michaels immediately about potential contempt of court and alert the Oregon property authorities about possible unauthorized transactions." The implications were significant. Bennett, considering violation of explicit court orders, indicated desperation, perhaps financial pressures we hadn't yet identified. Linda's quick action might prevent irreparable damage to assets that rightfully formed part of the marital estate. "Rachel still monitoring their communications?" David asked as we drove away from the courthouse. "Not actively spying," I clarified. "But she lives with Elaine, overhears conversations. Given what's at stake, she feels obligated to share anything relevant." "Complicated position for a sister," David observed. "Complicated position for everyone," I agreed, "but I'm grateful for her integrity." Later that afternoon, Linda called with an update. Judge Michaels issued an immediate supplementary order specifically preventing any alteration of the Oregon property's ownership or financing status. She's also requiring physical surrender of passports by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Will they comply? They'd be foolish not to. Violating direct judicial orders moves this from civil to criminal territory. Even Patricia Wells won't defend deliberate contempt of court. That evening, David and I celebrated the day's victories quietly. Takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, a basketball game on TV with the sound muted, conversation that carefully avoided courtroom drama in favor of more normal topics. It felt like practicing for a future where my personal catastrophe wasn't the central organizing principle of every interaction. My physical therapist had emphasized the importance of stress reduction for stroke recovery, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the nervous system hypervigilance beginning to ease. The asset freeze remained in place. Judge Michaels clearly recognized the exploitation element. Financial forensics confirmed systematic deception. Accountability mechanisms were engaging as designed. Before bed, I received another text from Rachel. Passports surrendered, Oregon property being monitored by local authorities, E and B arguing constantly now. Thought you should know. The system was working. Let's address the professional boundaries issue, the judge suggested, turning to me directly for the first time. Mr. Foster, what specific protections are you seeking regarding client relationships? I leaned forward slightly, my voice steadier than I'd anticipated. Your Honor, my primary concern is preventing further exploitation of client relationships I've built over decades. I'm seeking a 3-year non-solicitation agreement covering all Foster medical accounts active during my employment, with financial penalties for violations. Bennett shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Patricia whispered something to him before responding. Your Honor, my clients feel a 3-year restriction is excessive and potentially prevents them from pursuing legitimate business opportunities in a field where both have substantial experience. Judge Michaels turned to Bennett directly. Mr. Myers, given the evidence of systematic planning to appropriate these client relationships while Mr. Foster was still employed, including during his medical emergency, a 3-year restriction seems quite reasonable. In fact, many courts would support 5 years or more under these circumstances. The direct challenge from the judge visibly unsettled Bennett. He glanced at Patricia, who nodded slightly before responding. We can accept the 3-year restriction, Your Honor. By early afternoon, we'd resolved the remaining issues: mutual non-disparagement language, mechanisms for monitoring compliance, timeframes for implementation. Judge Michaels had successfully guided us to comprehensive agreement that addressed my core concerns while allowing Elaine and Bennett a path forward that didn't involve criminal charges. As the final document was being prepared for signatures, the judge called a brief recess. Linda and I stepped into the hallway for a private conversation. This is a good outcome, Mr. Foster, she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. Full financial recovery, appropriate professional protections, clear boundaries moving forward, and perhaps most importantly, closure that allows you to focus on health and rebuilding. I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions, relief certainly, but also a strange melancholy that surprised me. Not for the marriage lost, that grief had been processed weeks ago, but perhaps for the clean simplicity of what might have been. An honest conversation, an amicable parting, a transition managed with mutual respect rather than deception and exploitation. When we returned to the chamber, the settlement agreement awaited signatures. Judge Michaels had arranged 5 copies, 1 for each party, 1 for the court, 1 for official records. As we took our seats, she addressed the room with unexpected candor. Before we formalize this agreement, I want to acknowledge what has occurred here. Mr. Foster experienced a life-threatening medical emergency, during which his spouse made financial decisions that objectively constituted exploitation of his vulnerability. These actions, combined with evidence of long-term planning and professional improprieties, represent serious breaches of both marital and ethical obligations. She turned to Elaine and Bennett. The court has approved this settlement because Mr. Foster has chosen a path of reasonable resolution rather than punitive action. That choice reflects considerable grace that, quite frankly, exceeds what many would offer in similar circumstances. Elaine looked down at her hands. Bennett shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Neither spoke. Judge Michaels continued, "This agreement prevents criminal charges related to financial exploitation, but does not preclude other legal consequences that may arise from separate proceedings regarding corporate espionage or professional misconduct. Those matters remain outside this court's jurisdiction." With that sobering reminder, she gestured to the documents. "If all parties are prepared to proceed, please sign where indicated." One by one, we added our signatures. Elaine first, her typically confident handwriting slightly unsteady. Bennett next, a hasty scrawl that barely captured his full name. Then me, my right hand still occasionally uncooperative, but managing the task with deliberate focus. Finally, the attorneys, adding their professional validation to our personal commitments. With the signing complete, Judge Michaels officially accepted the agreement. This settlement is hereby entered into the record as a binding resolution to Foster v. Foster. The court retains oversight regarding implementation and compliance, but considers the substantive matters resolved. She gathered her materials and stood. We're adjourned. In that anticlimactic moment, signatures dry on. The page, judge departing, attorneys collecting documents. My marriage of 18 years officially ended. Not with dramatic confrontation or emotional catharsis, but with the bureaucratic finality of legal process. As we prepared to leave, Elaine approached me while Patricia engaged Linda in conversation several feet away. For a moment I thought, she might attempt one final manipulation or justification. Instead, she simply said, "I never wanted it to happen like this." I studied her face, still beautiful, still familiar after nearly 2 decades of shared life, yet belonging now to someone I no longer knew or trusted. "You made your choices, Elaine, repeatedly, deliberately, over months and years." She nodded, accepting this unassailable truth. "The beach house is beautiful," she said quietly, an odd non sequitur that nevertheless carried meaning between us. "You would have loved it." "Probably," I agreed, "but I wouldn't have wanted it obtained through deception." Something flickered across her expression, not quite remorse perhaps, but recognition of a fundamental difference in values that had always existed beneath the surface of our compatibility. Without another word, she turned and walked toward Bennett, who was watching our exchange with poorly concealed anxiety. Linda rejoined me as they departed. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "Everything is exactly as it should be." 6 months later, spring had returned to Minneapolis. The Oregon property had been sold, proceeds divided according to our agreement. My rehabilitation had progressed remarkably well, the facial asymmetry now barely noticeable. My speech fully recovered. Strength returned to my right side through diligent therapy and daily exercise. I'd moved from David's guest room to a comfortable condominium overlooking Loring Park. Smaller than the house I'd shared with Elaine, but better suited to my new life. Foster Medical had reorganized my division, creating a strategic advisory role that utilized my client relationship expertise while accommodating my reduced travel schedule following the stroke. Most importantly, I'd found a new equilibrium, not defined by victimhood or betrayal, but by the discovered strength that emerges from surviving what once seemed unsurvivable. Rachel and I maintained occasional contact, our connection evolving into something like friendship, independent of her relationship with Elaine. During our most recent coffee meeting, she'd mentioned that Bennett and Elaine had relocated to Phoenix after his repeated failures to secure employment in Minneapolis. The consulting venture had folded before launching, The non-solicitation agreement had prevented them from approaching any of my former clients. "She never mentions you," Rachel had said, stirring her latte thoughtfully. "But sometimes I catch her looking at old photos when she thinks no one's watching." I'd nodded, neither pleased nor disturbed by this information. Elaine's regrets, if she had any, were her own to manage, just as my recovery had been mine. On this particular spring morning, I was reviewing the quarterly statement from my restored retirement account when my phone rang, David calling with our weekly check-in. "How's the most boring accountant in Portland?" I greeted him smiling. At our familiar joke. "Less boring than usual," he replied, excitement evident in his voice. "I've been offered a position with a Minneapolis firm, thinking about moving back." The news was unexpected but welcome. Despite building new social connections, I'd missed the easy companionship of my brother's presence. "That's fantastic. When would you start?" "September. Thought maybe we could take that fishing trip to northern Minnesota before then. The one we've been talking about for years but never managed to schedule." "I'd like that," I said, realizing how much I meant it. The future stretching ahead now contained possibilities I hadn't anticipated during those dark days after the stroke, after discovering Elaine's betrayal. Not the future I'd once planned, certainly, but perhaps something more authentic, more aligned with who I'd become through crisis and recovery. The bank manager's face that day, when he realized what Elaine had done, that moment of human recognition, of moral clarity, had been a turning point, not just in the legal process, but in my understanding that systems could work, justice could prevail, and life could be rebuilt from the ruins of betrayal. Some lessons arrive with devastating force. Some betrayals leave permanent scars. But within that painful education lies an unexpected gift, the discovery that you are stronger, more resilient, and more capable of renewal than you ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.